Welcome to this week's Who the Folk podcast. I'm Lonnie Goldsmith, the editor of TC Jewfolk. This week we sit down with Alex Fisher, who recently started a new job as the Director of Community Education for the Hopkins School District. We talk about what community education is, how it's beneficial to the community, even empty nesters, and how the principles of community education apply to Judaism on this week's Who the Folk podcast. Alex Fisher, welcome to the Who the Folk podcast. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Lonnie. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you. And we are here in your office at the Eisenhower Community Center. You are the new Director of Community Education for Hopkins Public Schools.
That's correct.
You started pretty recently, right?
Yeah, July 1st was my first official day. I came in a little bit before that to work with the previous director, Katie, and she helped get me trained in. But yeah, July 1st was my first day.
So for people who don't know, tell us what is community education and what kind of falls under your purview here.
Sure. So community education is part of the school district. So each district has a community education fund where different programs come out of or are run out of. So community education is ECFE, all early childhood programs, preschool, early childhood and family education. So there's that. There's also all out-of-school time programs, so like childcare before school, after school. It's youth enrichment, so any chess camps or chess clubs or summer camps or any sports activities, enrichment like that. It's also adult enrichment, so I don't know, Lonnie, if you've ever participated in any like adult enrichment through community ed.
I have not personally, no.
Okay. But I did a lot previously, so I did a sourdough bread baking class with my mom, and I did a drawing class at certain times. So I've always really been involved with adult enrichment through community ed. And it's also adult basic education. So that's, adults who are learning English in our community. It's adults who have stopped attending high school but want to come back and get their GED or their adult diploma or need job skills or skills of that nature. And then it's facility rental, and Hopkins facilities rental is a big part of community education. So we rent out our facilities to the community, and it makes up a big part of our budget. So it's a little bit of all of that.
That's a huge job.
There's a lot. And I learned early that it's you hire really well and you have good people in place, and so I'm just kind of overseeing that, but really don't do much besides that.
So it's got to be, a school district the size of Hopkins, that's got to be a pretty big responsibility in terms of oversight of everything that goes on, because there's a lot of people that fall within the borders of the Hopkins School District.
Yeah, there are a number of kind of municipalities or cities that are in our attendance area. And so we do engagement and outreach in all of those communities, and all of those communities are welcome to participate in our community education. So, these are areas like St. Louis Park, Minnetonka, Eden Prairie, Plymouth, and I'm going to stop right there because I don't have the list in front of me, and I don't want to. You don't want to
leave anyone out.
Exactly.
No,
right.
I understand.
So
That's
there.
fair.
Yeah.
So I think the one thing people might not realize is, as you were listing all of the sort of responsibilities that fall under, is that even though it's part of the school district, people think of school district as K through 12, maybe preschool, but it's a lot bigger than that. It's a much bigger array of responsibilities.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So there's actually, there's a lot of different funds. If you think about school finance, there's, the K-12 teaching and learning fund. There's the school nutrition. There's all kinds of, and then there's community education. So I like to think of it as the school district as the major umbrella and the superintendent. And our superintendent is Dr. Rhoda Miri Puri Reed, and she kind of oversees everything. And then if you think of it like an umbrella that branches off, there's maybe two you can kind of think of it as two under umbrellas. There's the K-12 umbrella, which is all the teaching and learning, K-12 schools and the principals under that. Then on the other side is community education, and that's all the, as I mentioned, the preschool, the after school time, the enrichment programs, the adult basic ed, and that's kind of a separate area, all under the same district umbrella.
So this is a return to Hopkins for you because you were a classroom teacher in the district for 9 years, right?
That's right. Yep, I was a classroom teacher here for 9 years.
So what led you to not necessarily come back to the district, but to go from the classroom teaching side to the more administrative community ed side?
Yeah, so I was really looking to, I love being a teacher, I love being a classroom teacher. I found myself growing kind of increasingly helpless and uncomfortable with the opportunity gaps that we're seeing in our classrooms, and I felt like I needed to do more and affect systems on more of a higher level because I loved, as I mentioned, loved the connections with the families and loved the connections with the students, but more needed to be done. And so at a certain point, I realized that community partnerships are really what can drive our schools forward, and I became a big proponent, I guess, of working with parents, working with community organizations, going out in the community and really trying to partner there because the problems that we're seeing in our schools are bigger than just our teachers and bigger than just our principals. We actually need our community involved. And so that's kind of how I went down this path.
So what role do you think, not just you personally, but the sort of concept of community education departments in general at school districts help fill that kind of opportunity gap that you speak of and help build those partnerships? Yeah.
I think I think it's easy from the outside to look in and say schools should be doing more.
Who would disagree with that?
Right. And if you look in Minnesota especially, there's a huge gap between white students and students of color, students who are higher socioeconomic categories, and students who come from lower income families. There's just an enormous gap there, one of the largest in the country. So we really need to do more than we're doing, and we need to look at schools in a different way because they haven't been working for everyone. And so getting help from our community and finding mentorship opportunities and finding people who want to make a difference and who can give us their input and give us their feedback, that can really help us move forward and do things in different ways. But without that feedback and without that engagement, we just will continue to do things the same way, and that hasn't been working for people.
And Hopkins is a pretty diverse school district. It does stretch over a number of cities and a number of, areas, and I think people think of a lot of those cities as, like the parts of Minnetonka are very affluent, but then, parts of Hopkins as well. But then I think you can drive through some of those cities, and it's not all, I think, what you think it is or should be.
Yeah, that's a really good point. The demographics of Hopkins have changed a lot over the past 20 years. And we are trying to adjust to that and make it a more inclusive environment and make our learning styles our methods of engaging our students and our families more reflective of the diverse backgrounds from which they come. So we are, we're really changing things up. We're looking at making our spaces more flexible, more inclusive. We're looking at our teaching methods. We're trying to understand our own backgrounds. Most of the teaching force are white and come from backgrounds that are kind of Eastern European. And so traditionally, teachers from those backgrounds connect very well with students from similar backgrounds. But students who come from more diverse backgrounds, there hasn't always been that connection. And so the community, I think, is starting to understand that our school district has been changing for a long time, and it's going to continue to diversify, and we are ready for that, and we are trying to make our programs and our classrooms more inclusive and more welcoming, and just become a better district.
One of the things you'd said earlier, which I found really interesting and surprising, was how Minnesota ranks fairly low in the sort of equity scale when it comes to education. Why Why do you think that's so underreported? Because I feel like I try to pay attention to things, and I feel like I didn't realize we were quite that bad off.
Yeah, I think if we look in communities of color, it's fairly well known. But I think in kind of other communities, more in whiter, more affluent communities, we're doing pretty well there. I mean, whiter families from middle or higher income families do pretty well. I mean, our ACT scores are one of the highest in the country. And so we're doing, on the one end, we're doing things really well. On the other end, we're not doing well at all. And so there's that huge gap, which I mentioned before. And Minnesotans are really proud. We have a great state, and we have so much to offer here. And we do some things well, but there are other things that we don't do so well. And we're going to continue to try to figure out how we can make this a more inclusive environment for all of our families and all of our students.
Now, you came back to Hopkins from Roseville area schools. What is it? Did you see things that were working really well there in terms of maybe some of the equity gap issues that you think you can bring and help translate well over here to your new position?
That's an interesting question. I did see a lot that I think worked really well in Roseville. Roseville was really one of the leaders on including alternative narratives. And so that was something that was kind of really influential for our students, because instead of when I went to high school, a lot of the literature we studied was European. It was a lot of the history we studied was kind of from a white European viewpoint. And one of the things about looking at alternative narratives is you take the perspective of people who were kind of not part of the dominant narrative. They were, maybe discriminated against, or if you think of a situation where, there was some colonialism or something, rather than the story being told from the colonists, it was told from the people being colonized, and that's really makes a huge difference as far as opening your perspectives and understanding how different stories can be told. And so I think that was really effective and something that we can continue to grow on here in Hopkins.
So how do you sort of take the values that you've learned here and the values from the Jewish community that you've learned growing up and being active in the Minneapolis Jewish community as well? How do you sort of merge those two things? Do you see places to do that? I do. And that was actually a huge draw for me for community education, because one of my values, which I feel is a Jewish value, is education. And community. And so, combining community, combining education, it was a natural fit. Literally the department.
Exactly. And to go with that, lifelong learning, and that's community education. Community education is birth to death, really. Yeah. It is brand newborns who need childcare, and then it's older adults who come and enjoy our adult enrichment classes and our community events. So it spans the ages, and lifelong learning for me is a Jewish value, and it's a value that I see crossing over into community education.
And it's interesting you mentioned the sort of span of people who you work with here. The person who we had on last week's podcast, she talked about the sort of the epidemic, if you will, of loneliness amongst aging adults, and I sort of very much sees community education programs for older adults as an opportunity to get out and be active and be in community and not just sit, at home or in a care facility, wherever they are.
Right.
It gives them this opportunity. So it's an interesting sort of follow on from last week's conversation.
Oh, absolutely. The more active you can be, the more engaged you can be, the more friendships you can have, the healthier you are. And the other important element, which we should mention about community education too, is that after people's children graduate from school, they move on and go to college, but the people in our community stay in their houses. And we need their votes to pass referendum. So when they are able to participate in our programs and enjoy everything our district has to offer, it's more likely they'll see the benefit of having healthy, thriving schools. So that's another reason to keep people engaged.
Oh, absolutely. And I know where the school district I'm in, that's been a conversation in referendum times. The last several times it's been on the ballot was the need to sort of get not just the families who have school-age kids involved in voting, but really pushing beyond those families to the empty nesters and showing value in programs. And I think this is obviously a great way to show that.
For sure.
Well, last couple questions. We always end with favorite Jewish food.
Oh, wow. This is so hard because there's so many. So, I mean, the easy answer is brisket because I could eat it, breakfast, lunch, and dinner.
Yeah.
But my mom makes this thing called prakas. Do you know what prakas is?
I don't know what prakas is.
All right. So I think this is an Eastern European food.
It sounds like an Eastern European
food.
Right.
And there must be a K in there, too. I think it's like Prokas.
Okay.
But it's cabbage leaves. I think you steam the cabbage leaves, and then you put hamburger mixed with rice inside the cabbage leaf, and then you roll it up like a little burrito, like a Jewish burrito.
Yeah.
And then you put tomato sauce on top and bake it in the oven. It's very good.
Okay.
Yeah.
That sounds, both in name, it sounds like Hungarian, maybe.
Yeah, well, I have no idea. But it does sound Hungarian.
It sounds like, it's very Eastern European, though.
Yeah,
I have no doubt there.
It's like in the same family as goulash, possibly. And
sure.
Goulash is Hungarian, right? Hungarian goulash.
I suppose it is, yeah. All right, well, that makes sense then.
Yeah.
And favorite Jewish holiday?
Oh, man, that's a great question, too. For some reason, I really like Passover, and I think it's because of the Seders.
Okay.
After the Seders, that's a little tricky after about the fourth day.
Get sold.
Right, but the Seders are so great. Brings family together, and the food is amazing, so.
Well, excellent. Well, Alex, thank you very much. Good luck in your new job here.
Thanks.
And we appreciate you joining us this week.
Thank you so much, Lonnie. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much to Alex for joining us. If you haven't yet, please subscribe, rate, and review the show. You can get us on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcast, Stitcher, Spotify, and others. If you have suggestions of people who would be great interviews for the show, please email me. You can get me at editor@tcjewfolk.com. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you next week.